My name is Lorraine, I'm 58 years old, and I just caught my son-in-law Derek in my bathtub with another woman. The sound of their laughter echoed through my master bathroom as I stood frozen in the hallway, my heart pounding against my ribs. Without making a sound, I reached for the master key hanging behind the family photo and quietly locked the bathroom door from the outside. They had no idea they were now trapped. My daughter Brittany was supposed to be at work until midnight, trusting Derek to watch their 6-month-old baby who was sleeping peacefully in the nursery. But here he was, betraying everything our family stood for. Before we dive into how I made them pay for this betrayal, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button if you've ever felt the rage of family betrayal, and don't forget to subscribe because this story is about to get intense. You won't believe what I discovered next. Standing in that hallway, my mind raced back to 3 years ago when Derek first walked into our lives. He seemed like the perfect man for my daughter Brittany, all charm and smooth words, helping with groceries, fixing things around the house without being asked. After my husband Frank passed away 2 years ago from a sudden heart attack, I was drowning in mortgage payments and grief. Derek suggested they move in with me, claiming it would help everyone financially while giving me company during the difficult adjustment period. Derek had been complaining for weeks that their bathroom was broken, asking to use mine while I was at my book club meetings. I thought nothing of it, grateful for his help around the house and how he seemed to adore Brittany and baby Austin. He would bring me coffee in the mornings, asking about my day, remembering little details about my life that even my own daughter sometimes forgot. The whole family loved him. My sister Helen constantly praised me for raising such a smart daughter who found such a caring husband. But as I pressed my ear against the bathroom door, I heard a voice that made my blood run cold. It was Stephanie, Brittany's former best friend who had mysteriously cut all contact with our family 6 months ago. Stephanie had been like a second daughter to me, spending holidays with us, helping plan Brittany's baby shower. Then suddenly, she stopped returning calls, avoided family gatherings, and when Brittany asked what happened, Stephanie would only say she needed space. Now I understood why. The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. I crept to my bedroom and grabbed my phone, hands shaking as I positioned it near the keyhole. Through the narrow opening, I could see Derek's muscular frame pressed against Stephanie's pale skin, both of them completely oblivious to my presence. They were talking in low, intimate whispers, planning their next meeting, discussing how easy it was to fool everyone. Derek mentioned that Brittany's new work schedule gave them even more opportunities, since she had recently switched to evening shifts to earn the overtime money they desperately needed for baby expenses. The betrayal cut deeper than Frank's death. This was deliberate, calculated, cruel. Derek wasn't just cheating on my daughter, he was systematically destroying relationships within our family, turning people against each other while presenting himself as the innocent victim of circumstances. I thought about Brittany downstairs in the nursing scrubs she had washed and ironed so carefully, believing her husband was home being a devoted father while she worked double shifts to support their dreams of buying their own place. My hands stopped shaking as a cold determination settled over me. I quietly moved to Frank's old desk and pulled out the notebook where I used to track household expenses. If Derek wanted to play games, I would learn the rules better than he ever could. I started documenting everything. The time, what I heard, what I saw. I photographed the locked door, the timeline of events, even Derek's car parked in our driveway next to Stephanie's silver Honda that I now realized had been showing up on the days Brittany worked late. The bathroom had gone quiet except for running water. I knew they would be trapped for at least another hour, since I had deliberately chosen the old-fashioned door locks that could only be opened from the outside with the master key. Derek would assume it was just a stuck mechanism, the old house had quirky problems like that. It would give me time to prepare for what came next. What I didn't know yet was that Derek had no idea Brittany had switched her schedule again. She was supposed to come home early tonight, having traded shifts with a coworker who needed extra hours for her own family emergency. In exactly 43 minutes, my daughter would walk through that front door expecting to find her loving husband reading bedtime stories to their baby. Instead, she was about to discover that everything she believed about her marriage was a carefully constructed lie. The next morning, after Derek and Stephanie had finally discovered the locked door and Derek had spent 20 minutes loudly complaining about the house's faulty mechanisms, I began my investigation. Derek claimed he had been fixing a leak in the bathroom, that Stephanie had stopped by unexpectedly to drop off some of Brittany's old things, and that they were both trapped by the door malfunction. His explanation was smooth, practiced, delivered with just the right amount of frustrated innocence. But I knew what I had seen and heard. So I did something I had never done before in my 58 years. I became a spy in my own home. I started paying attention to our shared cell phone plan, noticing that Derek's data usage spiked dramatically during certain hours. When he left his phone charging in the kitchen while showering, I memorized his passcode by watching him enter it. What I found made me physically ill. Dating apps. Multiple profiles with different photos, different stories about his relationship status. Messages with dozens of women, all following the same pattern. Derek would present himself as either single or trapped in a loveless marriage, seeking someone who understood him. He had a rotating schedule of affairs, carefully timed around Brittany's work shifts and my book club meetings. The messages revealed a level of manipulation that shocked me. He studied these women, learned their weaknesses, told them exactly what they needed to hear. That's when Nancy appeared at my kitchen window. My 72-year-old neighbor had been watching our house with the sharp eyes of someone who had raised 6 children and buried 2 husbands. Nancy had observed Derek's patterns for months, noting license plates, times of arrival and departure, even taking photographs of different women entering and leaving our house. She had been debating whether to approach me, worried about interfering in family business, but my obvious distress that morning convinced her to speak up. Nancy spread her evidence across my kitchen table like a detective presenting a case. Photos of Derek with at least 5 different women, all taken on days when Brittany was at work. Timestamps showing regular patterns of behavior. Nancy had even documented Derek taking women into our backyard, showing them Frank's memorial garden and spinning stories about his difficult home situation to gain sympathy. The violation of my husband's memory made my grief transform into something harder and more focused. That afternoon, I called Miguel, Frank's best friend and business partner who had remained close to our family. Miguel had 30 years of experience in private investigation, having started his own security firm after retiring from police work. When I explained what I had discovered, Miguel's reaction was immediate and practical. He arrived within an hour carrying a briefcase full of equipment and a grim expression that told me he had suspected something was wrong for months. Miguel's investigation revealed layers of deception I hadn't imagined. Derek wasn't just having affairs, he was systematically stealing from our family finances. Small amounts, $10 or $20 at a time, transferred from my accounts to pay for his dates with other women. Hotel rooms, dinners, gifts, all funded by money he was taking from the household budget. Miguel showed me bank statements going back 8 months, a pattern of theft so gradual and subtle that I had attributed the missing money to rising grocery costs and household expenses. But the financial theft was nothing compared to what Miguel discovered about Derek's background. Derek had done this before, in 2 other states, targeting widows and single mothers with teenage or adult daughters. His pattern was always the same: charm the family, move in under the guise of helping, isolate the women from their support systems, and systematically drain their resources before disappearing. In Colorado, he had left a woman named Patricia with $30,000 in debt and a daughter who blamed her mother for driving away the only man who ever loved them. The evidence Miguel gathered painted a picture of a professional predator who had been planning this con for years. Derek had specifically targeted our family after Frank's death, studying our financial situation, learning our routines, identifying our vulnerabilities. He had researched Frank's life insurance payout, the value of our house, even Brittany's career prospects. We weren't a family to him, we were a business opportunity. But Miguel also warned me that Derek was getting desperate. His previous marks had been easier targets, women who were more isolated, families without strong community connections. Our situation was different because of the baby, because of Brittany's work connections, because of neighbors like Nancy who paid attention. Derek was taking bigger risks, making sloppier mistakes, which meant he was probably planning to accelerate his timeline and disappear with whatever he could steal. That's when I realized the true scope of Derek's plan. He wasn't just stealing money. He was positioning himself to claim Frank's life insurance payout that was still being processed due to administrative delays. As Brittany's husband and the father of Frank's only grandchild, Derek would have legal standing to make claims on the estate. He had been playing a long game, and we were nearly at the endgame. The knowledge that this man was sleeping under my roof, holding my grandchild, making plans to destroy my daughter's life and disappear with our family's security, filled me with a rage unlike anything I had ever experienced. But Miguel taught me to channel that rage into strategy. We would need evidence that would stand up in court, testimony that would convince family members who adored Derek, and a plan that would protect Brittany and the baby from the devastating realization that her marriage was built on lies. We had no idea that Derek was already suspicious of our activities, or that he had been laying groundwork for his own counterattack against anyone who might threaten his carefully constructed deception. 3 days later, I made the mistake of believing I had enough evidence to convince Brittany of the truth. I waited until Derek left for what he claimed was a job interview, then sat my daughter down at our kitchen table with printed photographs, bank statements, and a timeline of Derek's affairs that Miguel had helped me organize. I expected shock, anger, perhaps denial, but eventual acceptance of the evidence that was so clear and overwhelming. Instead, Brittany looked at the photos of Derek with other women and immediately began constructing alternative explanations. The woman at the coffee shop was obviously a work colleague discussing business. The intimate scene Nancy had photographed at the park was Derek comforting someone going through a difficult time. My daughter's mind simply refused to process what was directly in front of her, choosing instead to reframe every piece of evidence as proof of Derek's kindness and my paranoia. When I showed her the dating app screenshots, Brittany's face went white, but not with the realization I expected. Instead, she became furious at me for violating Derek's privacy, for sneaking through his personal belongings, for conspiring with neighbors to spy on her family. She accused me of being unable to accept that she had found happiness after losing her father, of being jealous of her marriage, of trying to sabotage her relationship because I couldn't bear to be alone in the house. The confrontation escalated when I produced the financial evidence. Brittany refused to believe that Derek could be stealing from us, insisting that any money transfers were probably mistakes or emergency expenses that Derek had been too proud to discuss. She turned each piece of evidence into a weapon against me, proof that I had become suspicious and controlling, incapable of trusting the man who had helped our family through its darkest period. That's when Derek returned home early from his supposed interview and found us arguing in the kitchen. His reaction was perfect, a masterclass in manipulation that I watched with horrified fascination. He expressed shock and hurt that I had been investigating him, disappointment that I couldn't trust him after everything he had done for our family, and gentle concern for my mental state since Frank's death. He suggested that grief was making me paranoid, that I was seeing threats where none existed, that I needed professional help to process my loss in a healthy way. But the real masterstroke was Derek's handling of the affair evidence. When confronted with the photographs and messages, he didn't deny everything outright. Instead, he admitted to corresponding with other women online, explaining that he had been seeking advice about dealing with my suspicious behavior and Brittany's work stress. He claimed the physical meetings were support group sessions for men dealing with difficult family situations. He even produced contact information for what he claimed was a men's support group, though I later learned these were phone numbers for his criminal associates. Derek's explanation for the bathroom incident with Stephanie was particularly crafted. He claimed that Stephanie had been stalking him for months, showing up uninvited, making inappropriate advances, and that he had been trying to handle the situation quietly to avoid embarrassing her or creating family drama. The locked door, he suggested, was probably Stephanie's doing, an attempt to trap him in a compromising situation that could be used to break up his marriage. Brittany believed every word. Worse, she became angry at Stephanie for supposedly pursuing her husband, at me for enabling the supposed harassment by allowing Stephanie into the house, and at our entire family for failing to support her marriage. She accused me of orchestrating the entire situation, of working with Stephanie to frame Derek because I couldn't accept that he made her happy. The argument reached its climax when Derek suggested that he and Brittany needed space from my toxic influence. They packed their belongings that same afternoon, taking baby Austin and moving to a small apartment across town that Derek claimed his brother could provide. Brittany left with tears in her eyes, not from heartbreak over Derek's betrayal, but from disappointment in her mother's behavior. As I watched them drive away with my grandchild, I realized that my direct approach had accomplished exactly what Derek wanted. He had successfully isolated Brittany from her primary support system, positioned himself as the victim of family persecution, and removed his family from my protective oversight. Now he could accelerate his plans without interference from me or anyone else who might recognize his true nature. Miguel arrived that evening to find me sitting in my empty kitchen, staring at the evidence that had seemed so compelling just hours before. He reminded me that Derek was a professional manipulator, that he had probably been preparing for this confrontation from the moment he entered our lives. We had underestimated his skill at psychological manipulation and overestimated Brittany's ability to see through his deception. But Derek had also made mistakes in his haste to remove Brittany from my influence. The apartment he claimed his brother was providing was actually a rental property owned by one of his criminal associates, a detail Miguel discovered within hours. Derek's rush to isolate my daughter had exposed connections to people with serious criminal backgrounds, giving us new avenues for investigation that Derek probably didn't realize he had opened. More importantly, by moving Brittany away from our house, Derek had lost his daily access to our financial accounts and his ability to monitor our communications. For the first time in months, Miguel and I could investigate freely without worrying about Derek overhearing our conversations or discovering our evidence-gathering activities. The real tragedy was that Brittany, in her determination to defend her marriage, had cut herself off from everyone who could help her recognize Derek's manipulation. She was now completely dependent on a man who viewed her as a resource to be exploited rather than a wife to be loved. And she had no idea how much danger she and her baby were actually in. Within a week of isolating Brittany in the apartment, Derek's behavior shifted into a more aggressive phase that revealed the calculated cruelty behind his charming facade. Miguel's surveillance equipment, strategically placed around the apartment building with the landlord's reluctant cooperation, captured Derek's true nature emerging now that he believed himself completely in control of the situation. Derek immediately began systematically dismantling Brittany's independence. He convinced her to quit her nursing job, claiming that baby Austin needed more attention and that her work stress was affecting their marriage. When Brittany protested that they needed her income, Derek assured her that he had several job opportunities that would provide better financial security for their family. These jobs, of course, were fictional, but Derek had become expert at creating believable stories supported by fake references and forged documents. With Brittany now financially dependent and isolated from family support, Derek began his recruitment of a new victim. Crystal Matthews, a 24-year-old pediatric nurse who had recently started working at the hospital where Brittany used to work, became Derek's next target. Crystal was everything Derek preferred in his victims: young, trusting, financially stable, and going through a vulnerable period after ending a long-term relationship. Derek's approach to Crystal was methodical and disturbing to observe through Miguel's surveillance. He positioned himself as a concerned friend of Brittany's, someone worried about a former colleague's well-being. He told Crystal that Brittany had become unstable after her father's death, that she was struggling with postpartum depression, and that her family situation was becoming dangerous for baby Austin. Derek presented himself as a devoted husband trying to protect his wife and child from a toxic family environment. Crystal's compassionate nature made her the perfect target for Derek's manipulation. She began offering emotional support to what she believed was a man in crisis, someone trapped in a difficult marriage to a mentally unstable woman. Derek carefully escalated their relationship from professional concern to personal friendship to intimate involvement, all while maintaining the fiction that he was a victim of circumstances beyond his control. The financial abuse of our family accelerated dramatically during this period. Derek had convinced Brittany to give him access to her bank accounts and credit cards, ostensibly to help manage their household finances while she focused on caring for Austin. Miguel's investigation revealed that Derek was systematically draining these accounts to fund his affair with Crystal, taking her to expensive restaurants, buying jewelry, even planning what he told her was a separation vacation, where they could explore their relationship without the stress of his complicated home situation. Meanwhile, Brittany's physical and emotional condition deteriorated rapidly. The few times I managed to see her at grocery stores or medical appointments, she looked exhausted, anxious, and significantly thinner. Derek had convinced her that my attempts to maintain contact were harassment, that Miguel's presence around their apartment building was stalking, and that our family's concern for her well-being was actually an attempt to steal Austin and destroy her marriage. Derek's control over Brittany extended to every aspect of her daily life. He monitored her phone calls, accompanied her to all appointments, and gradually eliminated her contact with friends and colleagues. When Crystal occasionally asked about Brittany's well-being, Derek would provide updates that painted my daughter as increasingly unstable and potentially dangerous, making Crystal feel even more sympathetic toward Derek's supposed plight. The most chilling discovery came when Miguel intercepted communications between Derek and his criminal associates. Derek wasn't just planning to steal our family's resources and disappear, he was actively working to have Brittany declared mentally incompetent so that he could gain legal control over Austin and any inheritance money. Derek had been documenting alleged instances of Brittany's unstable behavior, creating a false medical history supported by his criminal contacts who had experience forging official documents. Derek's associates were pressuring him to accelerate his timeline because they needed money he owed them from previous cons. The apartment where Derek had moved Brittany wasn't just isolated, it was owned by people who specialized in making problems disappear. If Derek couldn't extract enough money from our family quickly enough, or if Brittany became too much of a liability, these people had solutions that didn't involve leaving witnesses behind to testify about Derek's crimes. Crystal remained completely unaware that she was being used as both an emotional tool to manipulate Brittany and a potential escape route for Derek when his con reached its conclusion. Derek had been testing Crystal's willingness to relocate, suggesting that they might need to move somewhere Derek could get a fresh start away from his toxic family situation. Crystal interpreted this as romantic planning for their future together, not realizing that she was being positioned as an accomplice to kidnapping and fraud. The surveillance also revealed that Derek suspected our investigation was more extensive than he had initially realized. He had been probing Brittany for information about our activities, asking seemingly casual questions about my daily routine, Miguel's visits to the house, and any unusual phone calls or visitors. Derek was preparing countermeasures against our family, planning to discredit us completely before we could expose his criminal activities. Most disturbing was Derek's increasing volatility when he believed himself unobserved. Miguel's audio equipment captured Derek's true personality emerging when he was alone or only with his criminal associates. The charming, concerned husband disappeared, replaced by someone capable of calculating cruelty and casual violence. Derek spoke about Brittany with contempt, about Austin as a useful prop, and about our family as obstacles to be eliminated rather than people deserving of basic human consideration. We realized that our window for saving Brittany and Austin was closing rapidly. Derek's plan was entering its final phase, and once he had legal control over Austin and access to Frank's insurance money, he would disappear with both, leaving Brittany either dead or committed to a psychiatric facility where her testimony about Derek's crimes would be dismissed as delusions. We had to act decisively, but any direct approach would trigger Derek's endgame before we could protect my daughter and grandchild. The breakthrough came when Crystal finally agreed to meet with me, despite Derek's warnings about my supposedly unstable mental condition. Miguel had been carefully cultivating a relationship with one of Crystal's coworkers, someone who had noticed changes in Crystal's behavior and was concerned about her involvement with a married man. Through this intermediary, we arranged a meeting at a coffee shop across town where Derek's surveillance couldn't reach us. Crystal arrived expecting to encounter a deranged woman who had been stalking her relationship with Derek. Instead, she found documentation that systematically dismantled every story Derek had told her about our family, his marriage, and his background. The transformation in Crystal's face as she processed the evidence was heartbreaking to watch. She realized that her compassionate nature had been weaponized against an innocent family, that her relationship with Derek was built entirely on lies designed to exploit her empathy and resources. Crystal's information about Derek's plans proved more devastating than anything Miguel's surveillance had uncovered. Derek had been preparing Crystal for his eventual separation from Brittany by describing elaborate plans to protect Austin from his supposedly unstable mother. He had shown Crystal legal documents, which we now realized were forgeries, that would give him full custody of Austin and legal authority over Brittany's medical decisions. Derek had even discussed relocating to Mexico, where Crystal's nursing skills would be valuable and where they could start fresh without interference from American law enforcement. Through Crystal, we learned that Derek's financial situation was far more desperate than we had realized. His debts to criminal associates weren't just from previous cons that had gone wrong. Derek had been borrowing money at predatory interest rates to fund his lifestyle while waiting for access to Frank's life insurance payout. These weren't people who accepted late payments or negotiated extended terms. They expected full repayment plus interest within weeks, or they would collect their debt through methods that didn't involve the legal system. Crystal's cooperation allowed us to connect with Derek's previous victims in ways that Miguel's official investigation couldn't accomplish. The woman in Colorado, Patricia, had been trying to warn law enforcement about Derek for 2 years, but her reports had been dismissed because Derek's manipulation had made her appear mentally unstable and vengeful. Patricia provided crucial evidence about Derek's methods, including copies of forged documents and recordings of threats Derek had made when she tried to expose his crimes. The second victim, a woman named Linda in Oregon, had been too traumatized to speak with authorities, but she was willing to share her experience with Crystal, who she viewed as someone in a similar situation rather than an investigator. Linda revealed that Derek's pattern always included a phase where he would stage incidents to make his victims appear mentally unstable, creating a legal justification for gaining control over their finances and children. Linda's own daughter had been convinced to testify against her in custody proceedings, believing Derek's stories about her mother's deteriorating mental health. Armed with this pattern recognition, Miguel was able to identify similar tactics Derek had been using against Brittany. The isolated apartment wasn't just about controlling her access to family support, it was about creating a controlled environment where Derek could stage incidents that would support his narrative of Brittany's instability. Miguel discovered that Derek had been secretly recording Brittany during moments of exhaustion and emotional breakdown, editing these recordings to create the impression of someone having psychotic episodes. Our investigation expanded when Patricia connected us with Detective Sarah Williams, a specialist in financial fraud who had been tracking Derek's criminal network across multiple states. Detective Williams revealed that Derek was part of a larger organization that specialized in long-term cons targeting families affected by tragedy, death, or divorce. These criminals studied grief patterns, legal vulnerabilities, and financial systems to identify and exploit families during their most vulnerable periods. The scale of Derek's criminal network was staggering. Beyond the individual cons, they operated an identity theft ring, a document forgery operation, and a system for laundering stolen money through legitimate businesses. Derek's role was specifically recruitment and relationship management. He was skilled at identifying targets and maintaining long-term deceptions, while other members of the organization handled technical aspects like document creation and money movement. Detective Williams also revealed why Derek's timeline had become so compressed. Law enforcement had been building a case against the entire criminal organization, and recent arrests had made Derek's position increasingly precarious. He knew that he had limited time before the investigation reached him, which explained his desperation to complete the con against our family and disappear with whatever resources he could steal. The most shocking revelation came when Detective Williams showed us surveillance footage from Derek's previous crimes. We watched Derek using identical techniques against Patricia's family, employing the same stories, the same psychological manipulation, even the same staging of incidents to make his victims appear unstable. Derek wasn't improvising his treatment of our family, he was following a detailed playbook that had been refined through multiple successful cons. Crystal's willingness to cooperate gave us the opportunity to set a trap for Derek, but it also placed her in considerable danger. Derek's criminal associates had eliminated witnesses before, and if they suspected Crystal was working with law enforcement, her safety would be in immediate jeopardy. We had to move carefully, building our case while protecting Crystal and gathering enough evidence to ensure that Derek couldn't manipulate his way out of prosecution. Detective Williams warned us that Derek would become increasingly dangerous as his options narrowed. Men like Derek often escalated to violence when their carefully constructed deceptions began falling apart, particularly when their escape routes were threatened. We were entering the most dangerous phase of Derek's con, the period when his charming facade would disappear completely and his true nature would emerge. The race was on to gather enough evidence to arrest Derek before he realized the scope of our investigation, but we also had to protect Brittany and Austin from becoming casualties of Derek's desperation. Our family's survival depended on outmaneuvering a professional criminal who had spent years perfecting his ability to destroy families and disappear without consequences. Detective Williams designed our trap around Derek's greatest weakness, his greed and his belief that he was smarter than everyone around him. Crystal would serve as the bait, offering Derek information about a fabricated inheritance that would solve his immediate financial problems while giving us the evidence needed to arrest him before he could harm Brittany or Austin. The fictional inheritance belonged to Crystal's great-aunt, a wealthy recluse who had recently died and left a complicated estate that included cash, jewelry, and real estate worth over $200,000. Crystal told Derek that she needed help accessing the inheritance because family legal complications required documentation of financial stability and character references from established community members. Derek's role would be to pose as Crystal's financial advisor and provide false documentation about their business relationship. Derek's reaction to Crystal's story exceeded our expectations for revealing his true character. Within hours of learning about the inheritance, Derek was pressuring Crystal to expedite the legal process, offering to connect her with his associates, who specialized in resolving complicated estate issues. Derek immediately began planning how they would use the inheritance money to relocate permanently, describing their future life together in terms that made clear he never intended to return to Brittany and Austin. Miguel's surveillance equipment captured Derek's conversations with his criminal associates about the inheritance opportunity. We listened to Derek describing Crystal as completely manageable, and discussing plans to steal the inheritance money before disappearing, leaving Crystal to face legal consequences when the fictional estate fraud was discovered. Derek's associates warned him that if this final score failed, their organization would consider him a liability and handle the situation accordingly. The technical aspects of our trap required Derek to provide detailed documentation of his financial activities, supposedly to support Crystal's inheritance claim but actually to give us evidence of his crimes against our family. Derek willingly handed over bank statements, transaction records, and even communications with his criminal associates, believing that he was helping Crystal secure their shared future while actually providing prosecutors with everything needed to convict him of multiple felonies. Crystal's cooperation in wearing recording equipment during her meetings with Derek captured admissions that would have been impossible to obtain through traditional investigation. Derek explicitly confessed to stealing from our family, discussed his plans to have Brittany declared mentally incompetent, and detailed his strategy for gaining permanent custody of Austin. Most damaging, Derek admitted that he had used similar techniques against previous families and that Brittany's well-being was irrelevant to his plans as long as she remained useful for legal purposes. But Derek's suspicious nature, honed by years of criminal activity, began to surface as the inheritance process progressed. He started asking Crystal probing questions about her family history, demanding to meet her relatives, and investigating details of the fictional estate that didn't align with his understanding of probate law. Derek's criminal training was making him increasingly paranoid about the sudden appearance of such a convenient opportunity. The situation became critical when Derek's associates decided to conduct their own investigation of Crystal's inheritance claim. These men had resources that allowed them to verify legal documents, check court records, and investigate family histories with professional thoroughness. If they discovered that Crystal's great-aunt and the entire inheritance were fictional, Derek would realize that he was being trapped and would likely disappear immediately, taking Brittany and Austin with him. Detective Williams accelerated our timeline, but this created new dangers for everyone involved in the operation. Crystal was now wearing recording equipment during increasingly frequent meetings with Derek, each conversation providing crucial evidence but also increasing the risk that Derek would detect the surveillance. Brittany remained isolated and unaware of the investigation, making it impossible to warn her about the immediate danger she and Austin faced. Miguel's surveillance revealed that Derek had begun making preparations for a rapid departure from the area. He had purchased supplies suggesting a long trip, researched transportation routes that would be difficult to trace, and started liquidating assets that could be quickly converted to cash. Derek was positioning himself to disappear within days, regardless of whether the inheritance scheme succeeded. The most troubling development was Derek's increasing volatility during his interactions with Brittany. Audio surveillance from their apartment captured Derek losing patience with maintaining his caring husband facade, speaking to Brittany with open contempt and making threats about her behavior that suggested he was preparing to eliminate her as a witness to his crimes. The psychological pressure of the investigation, combined with his mounting debts to dangerous criminals, was destabilizing Derek's ability to maintain the long-term deception that had protected him previously. Crystal's safety became our primary concern when Derek's associates began following her to work, monitoring her daily routine, and asking questions about her background that suggested they suspected her involvement with law enforcement. Detective Williams arranged for protective surveillance, but Crystal was essentially living undercover among criminals who would kill her without hesitation if they discovered her cooperation with our investigation. The trap was nearly complete, but Derek's growing paranoia threatened to trigger his escape plan before we could arrest him. We had evidence to convict him of multiple felonies, but Derek still had physical control over Brittany and Austin, and his criminal associates were pressuring him to resolve his debts immediately. One wrong move would alert Derek to our investigation, giving him time to disappear with my daughter and grandchild before law enforcement could intervene. We were balanced on the edge of success and disaster, with Derek's criminal network closing in on Crystal while we raced to complete the evidence gathering that would save our family and bring Derek to justice. The next 48 hours would determine whether our months of investigation would rescue Brittany and Austin or whether Derek's desperation would destroy everyone who threatened his freedom. Our carefully constructed plan collapsed when Derek's paranoia finally overcame his greed. Crystal arrived at their planned meeting to find Derek agitated and suspicious, demanding explanations for inconsistencies he had discovered in her inheritance story. Someone in his criminal network had access to legal databases that revealed the fictional nature of Crystal's great-aunt's estate, exposing our entire investigation and putting Crystal in immediate physical danger. Derek's reaction was swift and terrifying. Instead of simply disappearing, he decided to eliminate all threats to his freedom before relocating. Derek confined Crystal in a storage facility owned by his associates, interrogating her about the scope of law enforcement involvement while his criminal partners discussed permanent solutions to their exposure problem. Crystal's disappearance triggered Detective Williams to activate emergency protocols, but Derek had already anticipated law enforcement response and moved to his backup location with Brittany and Austin. The backup location was a remote cabin in the mountains, owned by Derek's criminal organization and specifically designed for situations requiring temporary containment of witnesses or problematic associates. Brittany had no idea that she was being taken to a place where people like her had disappeared permanently in the past. Derek told her they were taking a brief vacation to celebrate a new job opportunity, and Brittany, isolated and psychologically manipulated for months, accepted his explanation without question. Miguel's tracking devices, which we had managed to plant on Derek's vehicle, allowed us to follow their movement to the cabin, but the remote location made immediate rescue impossible. Derek's associates had established the cabin as a fortress, with armed security, communication jammers, and escape routes that would allow them to disappear into wilderness areas where tracking would be nearly impossible. Law enforcement required time to organize a response that could overcome these defensive measures without endangering the hostages. Meanwhile, Derek's psychological control over Brittany finally began to crack as the stress of the situation overwhelmed his ability to maintain his deception. Isolated in the cabin with no distractions or outside influences, Brittany started to recognize inconsistencies in Derek's behavior and stories that she had previously dismissed or rationalized. Derek's increasing agitation, his harsh treatment of Austin when the baby cried, and his violent outbursts at seemingly minor frustrations revealed the man he had been hiding behind his charming facade. The financial devastation Derek had wreaked on our family became clear when banks and credit companies began contacting Brittany about overdue payments on accounts she hadn't known existed. Derek had been opening credit cards and loans using Brittany's identity and our family's information, accumulating massive debts that would have destroyed our financial stability even if he had never been caught. The cabin's isolation meant these calls went directly to voicemail, creating an electronic record of Derek's systematic theft that Brittany heard for the first time. Detective Williams coordinated with federal agencies because Derek's criminal network operated across state lines and involved multiple serious felonies including kidnapping, identity theft, and organized fraud. The investigation revealed that Derek's organization had been responsible for dozens of similar crimes over the past decade, targeting vulnerable families and stealing millions of dollars while leaving their victims financially destroyed and psychologically traumatized. Crystal's interrogation by Derek's associates provided crucial intelligence about the organization's structure and methods, but it also revealed that these criminals were prepared to eliminate all witnesses if law enforcement pressure became too intense. Crystal's life depended on our ability to rescue her before Derek's associates decided that cleaning up loose ends was more important than extracting information about our investigation. Brittany's awakening to Derek's true nature accelerated when she overheard Derek discussing her elimination with his associates. The shock of realizing that the man she had trusted with her life and her child's future was calmly planning her murder finally broke through Derek's psychological conditioning. For the first time in months, Brittany began thinking independently about her situation and looking for opportunities to protect herself and Austin. The revelation of Derek's criminal background devastated Brittany's understanding of her own marriage and family situation. Every memory of their relationship was contaminated by the knowledge that Derek had been studying and manipulating her from their first meeting, that his love and support had been calculated performance designed to exploit her vulnerabilities. The man she had defended against her family's concerns, the husband she had chosen over her mother's warnings, had never existed except as a disguise worn by someone who viewed her as prey rather than a person. Derek's associates pressured him to resolve the situation quickly because law enforcement activity was threatening their other criminal operations. They gave Derek an ultimatum: eliminate all witnesses and disappear within 24 hours, or they would handle the cleanup themselves and eliminate Derek as well. This deadline forced Derek to abandon his careful, methodical approach and begin making desperate decisions that would create opportunities for law enforcement intervention. The cabin's remote location, which Derek had chosen for security, also isolated him from backup and resources that might have helped him manage the crisis. Derek was essentially trapped with hostages who were becoming increasingly difficult to control, while facing threats from his own criminal associates if he failed to resolve the situation according to their timeline. Miguel's surveillance equipment, which had been providing crucial intelligence about Derek's activities, was discovered by Derek's security sweep of the cabin. This discovery confirmed Derek's worst fears about the scope of law enforcement investigation while simultaneously blinding our rescue operation at the moment when accurate intelligence was most critical for Brittany and Austin's survival. The situation had evolved from a complex investigation into a hostage crisis involving multiple armed criminals, federal law enforcement agencies, and family members whose lives depended on decisions made by people trained in violent solutions to complicated problems. Our months of careful planning and evidence gathering had led to the confrontation we had hoped to avoid, with Derek and his associates cornered and desperate enough to choose violence over surrender. Brittany and Austin were now completely dependent on law enforcement's ability to rescue them before Derek's desperation or his associates' impatience led to a resolution that would eliminate all witnesses to their criminal activities. The rescue operation began at dawn with federal agents and local law enforcement surrounding the cabin while Derek was still unaware that his location had been discovered. Detective Williams coordinated a multi-agency response that included hostage negotiators, tactical teams, and medical personnel prepared for casualties. Miguel and I were positioned at a safe distance where we could monitor communications and provide intelligence about Derek's psychological profile and likely reactions to law enforcement pressure. Inside the cabin, Derek's psychological control over Brittany continued deteriorating as the stress of the situation pushed him beyond his ability to maintain his deception. Brittany later described watching Derek's personality completely transform as he abandoned all pretense of being the loving husband and devoted father. The man who had charmed our entire family revealed himself as someone capable of casual cruelty and calculated violence, discussing Brittany's elimination with the same emotional detachment he might use to plan grocery shopping. Derek's first indication that law enforcement had found him came when his associates' communication devices went silent simultaneously, indicating that other members of his criminal network were being arrested in coordinated raids across multiple states. Derek realized that his entire organization was being dismantled and that his options had narrowed to immediate escape or violent confrontation with federal agents who were prepared for both possibilities. The hostage negotiator's initial contact with Derek revealed the full extent of his desperation and his complete lack of concern for Brittany and Austin's well-being. Derek immediately demanded transportation to Mexico, immunity from prosecution, and a substantial cash payment in exchange for releasing his hostages. When negotiators explained that such demands were impossible, Derek threatened to kill Brittany and Austin before surrendering, describing their deaths as preferable to allowing them to testify about his crimes. Brittany's courage emerged when Derek's attention was focused on his negotiations with law enforcement. Despite months of psychological manipulation that had undermined her confidence and independence, my daughter found the strength to begin planning her own escape with Austin. Brittany used Derek's distraction to locate potential weapons, identify escape routes, and position herself to protect Austin if Derek became violent. The breakthrough came when Derek's own arrogance provided the opportunity that tactical teams needed to end the standoff safely. Derek demanded to speak directly with Detective Williams, believing that he could manipulate the negotiation process through his superior understanding of human psychology. This demand brought Derek to the cabin's main window, exposing him to sniper observation and giving tactical teams clear intelligence about hostage positions and Derek's location. Derek's criminal associates, Martin among them, had been under surveillance throughout the operation, and their attempts to reach the cabin were intercepted by law enforcement teams positioned along all access routes. Martin's capture provided crucial intelligence about the cabin's interior layout, security measures, and Derek's likely behavior under pressure. Martin's cooperation was motivated by his own desire to avoid federal prosecution for his role in Derek's criminal organization. The final phase of the rescue operation was triggered when Derek's psychological pressure reached a breaking point and he became physically violent toward Brittany for the first time in their relationship. Surveillance equipment detected sounds of struggle inside the cabin, indicating that Derek had abandoned negotiation and was preparing to eliminate his hostages before attempting to escape or commit suicide. Federal tactical teams breached the cabin simultaneously from multiple entry points, using flashbang grenades and coordinated movement to overwhelm Derek's ability to respond effectively. Derek's attempt to use Austin as a human shield was thwarted when Brittany fought back with desperate strength, protecting her child even as Derek struck her repeatedly and threatened to kill them both. Derek's capture occurred when his own criminal training failed him under the psychological pressure of federal agents storming his position while he was simultaneously fighting with Brittany and trying to control a screaming infant. Derek had spent years manipulating situations through charm and deception, but he had no experience with direct physical confrontation against trained professionals who were immune to his psychological tactics. The medical evaluation of Brittany and Austin revealed the full extent of Derek's abuse during their captivity. Both were dehydrated, malnourished, and showing signs of severe psychological trauma. Austin had been denied adequate food and medical care during their time at the cabin, while Brittany showed evidence of physical abuse that Derek had inflicted when his psychological control methods proved insufficient. Derek's complete confession came after his arrest when he realized that the evidence against him was overwhelming and that his criminal associates had already provided testimony about his activities in exchange for reduced sentences. Derek admitted to years of systematic fraud, identity theft, and psychological abuse targeting multiple families, describing his crimes with the same casual detachment that had characterized his treatment of our family. Crystal's rescue from the storage facility occurred simultaneously with the cabin operation, and her testimony provided the final pieces of evidence needed to ensure Derek's conviction on federal charges that would guarantee life imprisonment without possibility of parole. Crystal's courage in maintaining her cover despite knowing the extreme danger she faced had been crucial to protecting our family and exposing Derek's entire criminal organization. The reunion with Brittany and Austin was complicated by the psychological trauma both had endured and Brittany's complicated feelings about her own role in enabling Derek's abuse through her defense of his behavior and rejection of family warnings. The joy of having them safely home was tempered by the long process of healing that would be required to address the damage Derek had inflicted on our family relationships and Brittany's ability to trust her own judgment. Derek's arrest marked the end of his immediate threat to our family, but it also began a legal process that would require Brittany to testify about intimate details of her abuse and manipulation while Derek's defense attorneys attempted to minimize his crimes by portraying his victims as willing participants in his deception. The months following Derek's arrest were a journey of healing that proved more complex and challenging than the investigation that had led to his capture. Brittany struggled with guilt over her role in enabling Derek's abuse of our family, shame about her failure to recognize his manipulation, and anger at herself for choosing Derek over the family members who had tried to protect her. The psychological trauma of discovering that her entire marriage had been a calculated deception required extensive therapy and patient support from everyone who loved her. Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the trauma specialist Brittany worked with, helped her understand how Derek's manipulation had been designed specifically to exploit her vulnerabilities and override her natural instincts for self-protection. Brittany learned that Derek had studied her grief over Frank's death, her desires for financial security and family stability, and her natural compassion to create a persona that would be irresistible to someone in her situation. Understanding that Derek's success was due to his criminal expertise rather than her personal failures was crucial to Brittany's recovery. The financial recovery process required months of legal proceedings to untangle Derek's theft and restore our family's credit and accounts. Derek had opened over 20 fraudulent accounts using our personal information, accumulated nearly $60,000 in debt that we were legally responsible for, and stolen approximately $40,000 in cash and assets. Miguel worked with Detective Williams and federal prosecutors to trace Derek's criminal network's assets and recover what could be returned to his victims. Crystal became an unexpected but crucial part of our extended family during the recovery process. Her courage during the investigation had saved our lives, but her own trauma from Derek's abuse and threats required ongoing support that our family was uniquely positioned to provide. Crystal understood Derek's manipulation tactics in ways that even mental health professionals couldn't fully grasp without direct experience, making her insights valuable for Brittany's healing process. Austin's well-being became our primary focus as we worked to create stability and security for a child who had spent his earliest months in an environment of psychological manipulation and increasing violence. Pediatric specialists evaluated Austin for developmental delays or trauma responses, while our family worked to provide consistent, loving care that would help him form healthy attachment patterns despite his exposure to Derek's abuse. The legal proceedings against Derek revealed the full scope of his criminal organization and the number of families he had destroyed over his career. Derek ultimately pled guilty to 37 federal charges including kidnapping, identity theft, organized fraud, and racketeering, receiving a sentence of life imprisonment without possibility of parole. His testimony against other members of his criminal network helped prosecutors dismantle an organization that had operated across 12 states and stolen millions of dollars from vulnerable families. Nancy's role in our family's survival earned her a permanent place in our household and hearts. Her careful documentation of Derek's activities had provided crucial early evidence, and her friendship sustained me during the most difficult periods of the investigation. Nancy moved into our house permanently, providing additional security and support while giving Austin another loving grandparent figure who had helped save his life. Brittany's decision to return to school and pursue a degree in social work emerged from her desire to help other families recognize and escape from manipulative relationships. Her personal experience with Derek's tactics gave her unique insights into how abusers operate and how victims can be supported through the process of recognizing and escaping manipulation. Brittany's academic work focused specifically on financial abuse and its role in maintaining psychological control over victims. The community response to our family's experience led to educational programs about recognizing financial fraud and psychological manipulation, particularly targeting widows and single mothers who are frequent targets for these types of crimes. Detective Williams worked with our family to develop presentation materials that could help other families identify early warning signs of predatory behavior before becoming victims. Miguel's private investigation firm expanded to specialize in cases involving long-term psychological manipulation and financial abuse, with our family's case serving as a model for how families and law enforcement can work together to expose and prosecute these complex crimes. Miguel's expertise in both investigation techniques and understanding criminal psychology made him a valuable resource for other families facing similar situations. The healing process taught our family important lessons about the difference between healthy support and enabling behavior, the importance of maintaining family connections even during difficult periods, and the value of trusting instincts when something feels wrong about someone's behavior. We learned that love sometimes requires difficult conversations and uncomfortable confrontations when someone we care about is in danger. Brittany's relationship with Austin strengthened as she worked through her trauma and developed confidence in her parenting abilities without Derek's interference and manipulation. Watching Brittany reclaim her independence and rebuild her sense of self-worth became one of the most rewarding aspects of our family's recovery process. The financial recovery, while challenging, ultimately brought our family closer together as we worked cooperatively to rebuild what Derek had destroyed. The experience taught us about the importance of financial transparency and communication, leading to family discussions about money management and security that helped protect us from future exploitation. 3 years after Derek's arrest, our family has built a life characterized by honesty, mutual support, and healthy boundaries that protect us while allowing individual growth and independence. Brittany graduated with honors from her social work program and now helps other families navigate the legal and emotional challenges of escaping abusive relationships. Austin is a healthy, happy child who will grow up understanding the importance of recognizing and rejecting manipulation while building relationships based on genuine care and respect. The experience with Derek was the most difficult challenge our family had ever faced, but it also revealed our capacity for courage, cooperation, and healing when we work together to protect each other. We learned that predators like Derek depend on their victims' isolation and shame to maintain control, and that breaking that isolation through honest communication and professional support can overcome even the most sophisticated manipulation. Our story demonstrates that families can survive and recover from even the most devastating betrayal when they refuse to give up on each other and seek help from people with the expertise and resources needed to fight back against criminal manipulation. The key is recognizing that asking for help is a sign of strength rather than failure, and that protecting our family sometimes requires us to fight battles we never imagined we would face. What would you have done if you discovered your son-in-law betraying your family like this? Have you ever had to choose between confronting someone directly or building a case carefully over time? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if you believe families should fight back against those who try to destroy them. Subscribe for more stories about real families overcoming impossible situations, and share this video with anyone who might be facing similar challenges in their own lives. Thank you for joining me on this journey of heartbreak and healing, and remember that no matter how dark things seem, families who stand together can overcome even the most dangerous predators. Stay strong, trust your instincts, and never give up on the people you love.